Let's turn attention now to the Israel-Hamas war, as Israeli Defense Minister Gallant is calling on the U.S. to work together to prevent Iran from possessing nuclear weapons. According to him, Iran is the greatest threat to the future of the world. Mr. Gallant was speaking at a meeting with U.S. Secretary of Defense, Mr. Lloyd Austin, during his trip to America for talks over the conflicts with Hamas in Gaza and Hezbollah in Lebanon. Mr. Gallant also expressed gratitude to the U.S. and Austin personally for the support shown since the Hamas attack on Israel on October 7 last year, and also called for deepening ties in the face of attacks on the global arena. His visit to the U.S. to meet with the country's top officials comes as the situation on the Israeli border with Lebanon worsens. On his part, Secretary Austin said a diplomatic solution is needed to avoid a costly war between Israel and the Lebanese armed group Hezbollah.
Since Hamas launched its brutal attack on October 7th, you were the first to fly to Israel on October 13. You stood with us then, and you stand with us today. The people of Israel will never forget these moments. The President, the administration, and you personally, Mr. Secretary, have been with us since day one. This includes working together to defend Israel against a massive attack by Iran and its proxies, as you mentioned. Today we are at a crossroad that will impact the entire Middle East. I'm here to discuss the ways to achieve our common goals, ensuring the security of the State of Israel and projecting the powerful ties between our countries. In Gaza, we must work together to ensure the return of 120 hostages, with no exception. We must end the terrorist regime of Hamas. In the north, we are determined to establish security, changing reality on the ground, and bringing our communities safely back home.
Well, let's cross over live to Jerusalem, where the VOA's Linda Grandstand is standing by. She joins us live now on the program. Linda, it's always great to see you again. We should begin with the all-essential meeting between U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin with his Israeli counterpart, Gallant. Mr. Austin says a diplomatic solution is possibly needed to avoid a costly war between Israel and the Lebanese armed group Hezbollah. What more are you hearing from Mr. Gallant's visit to the U.S., Linda?
Well, his visit to the U.S. is quite important, and he also used it to kind of attack the Israeli prime minister. Last week, Prime Minister Netanyahu, actually he did it twice, released two public videos in which he attacked the United States and said that the U.S. has been holding up arms shipments to Israel, and that was interpreted in the U.S. with they kind of came back and said, we have no idea what he's talking about. In his meeting with Lloyd Austin, Gallant issued a statement, a video in which he said, every family, and we consider the American people our family. In every family, disagreements may arise. Yet, like all families, we discuss our disagreements in-house and remain united. And that was kind of a dig at Netanyahu, saying that any criticism that Netanyahu may have had of the U.S. administration should have been voiced privately and not publicly.
Mm. And I wonder perhaps what is the feedback at home for residents as the defense minister meets with top U.S. officials on the war?
Well, of course, Israelis are following this very closely. And I think there's a sense that they're happy that these meetings are taking place. They think it's important that Israeli officials meet directly with U.S. officials. Prime Minister Netanyahu, by the way, is supposed to address a joint session of Congress in July 24th. And, there's as much as, communications can do and exchange of letters can do, it's important to me personally. And I think that Israelis feel that the support of the United States is really vital. They're very grateful for that support. And I think they're happy to see the defense minister expressing that.
Alina, over the years, Hezbollah has cemented itself as a regional power and a pivot in the axis of resistance. Its influence, we understand, extends to Syria, Iraq, and Yemen, where it coordinates logistics, operations, as well as training with like-minded groups. So I wonder, does Israel feel threatened?
I think Israel certainly does feel threatened, and that there's a sort of a sense that if there is a war between Israel and Hezbollah, I mean, a lot of people say there already is a war, but a full-scale ground invasion by Israel into Lebanon, that it will really turn into a regional war, perhaps with Iran participating directly. Until now, Iran has preferred to use proxies rather than fight Israel directly. But in April, we did see Iran attacking Israel with hundreds of rockets after Israel assassinated a senior Iranian official. So if that happens, would the United States be pulled in? In other words, is a possible war between Israel and Hezbollah, which would also mean, thousands of rockets coming from Lebanon, from Hezbollah into Israel, Israel responding, attacking all of Lebanon's infrastructure. Could that become, and it seems likely it would become, a regional war that might pull in far more than Israel and Hezbollah? The United States has made it very clear that they want a diplomatic solution. Israel's former chief of staff, Benny Gantz, who was in the government and just pulled out of the cabinet, said that Israel could finish Hezbollah in a few days if it has if it makes a decision that that's what it wants to do. But he also said the price would be painful.
Absolutely. I mean, and we'll come back to this possible war with Hezbollah. But in terms of a possible ceasefire, Qatar says there has been some sort of progress in negotiations for a ceasefire in Gaza, which of course has been, and it is continuing in mediation to bridge the gap between Israel and Hamas. Is Israel willing to accept the new UN Gaza ceasefire resolution?
Well, what Israel says is that it needs to, what they say, the devil is in the details. So, President Biden last month talked about an Israeli plan and said that it's time for Hamas to get on board. Prime Minister Netanyahu then said that even after a first stage, when hostages would be released, Israel will not end the war in Gaza. And that's where it's kind of been stuck, where Hamas insisting that this ceasefire lead to a complete ceasefire and a withdrawal from Gaza, and Israel saying that it continues its goal of destroying Hamas completely. Now, some Israeli officials, including, by the way, the army spokesman, and just recently Tzachi Hanegbi, a senior advisor to Netanyahu, said that it's actually not possible to destroy Hamas. Hamas is an idea, and that Hamas has already been hurt significantly. Israel says that it is moving to a new phase of the war in Gaza, that it is close to finishing its campaign in the southern Gaza city of Rafah. It controls the Philadelphia route, the border between Gaza and Egypt, which it will probably continue to do in order to prevent arms smuggling into Gaza. But it seems that Israel is moving out of Gaza and perhaps into a more intensive conflict with Lebanon.
And I wonder if perhaps the protests and demonstrations aimed at Prime Minister Mr. Benjamin Netanyahu's residence, if that perhaps has also mounted some sort of pressure on the Prime Minister.
Well, even before the war, the previous crisis was an internal Israeli crisis about the judicial overhaul. And there were hundreds of thousands of people in the streets. And so I'm not sure how much Prime Minister Netanyahu is really moved by demonstrations outside his house or anywhere else. At the same time, yesterday there was a Supreme Court decision that Israel has to start drafting the ultra-Orthodox, who until now have gotten exemptions from the army. And, if that really does happen, it's possible that that could lead to the collapse of the coalition and perhaps new elections. Polls show that a majority of Israelis want new elections. They don't have confidence in Prime Minister Netanyahu, but it would have, somewhat ironically, it might be sort of the drafting of the ultra-Orthodox rather than his conduct over the war in Gaza that could eventually bring down the government. But it's not happening, in the next day or two in any case.
Absolutely, Linda. And just one final question before I let you go, because some experts and analysts are suggesting that Hezbollah's threat to retaliate against Cyprus if it helps Israel attack Lebanon has highlighted the Mediterranean island's delicate geopolitical position. So I'm just wondering perhaps what exactly is at stake here, really?
Well, Cyprus has kind of tried to be neutral as much as possible in this conflict. And I think it sort of shows the possible difficulty that, a war between Israel and Lebanon or a war between Israel and Hezbollah, like the one that happened in 2006, could very easily spread beyond that, and that it won't be just Israel and Hezbollah, but it will involve all of the countries in the region and perhaps even Iran and the United States.
It's a fine place to anchor our conversation, Linda. We hope for an immediate and permanent ceasefire in Gaza, where we understand conditions remain dire and, of course, really very terrifying indeed, especially as regards supplies of aid and medicine as well, and then, of course, malnutrition of children. But thank you most kindly, the VOA's correspondent, Linda Grandstein, live for us in Jerusalem. Thanks indeed for analysis, as always.
Thank you.
To other stories now. There has been no let-up in the terrible human cost of the war in Gaza, where 10 children lose one or both legs every day amid ongoing Israeli bombardment and renewed fears of famine. That's according to the head of the UN Agency for Palestine Refugees, Philippe Lazzarini. And updates on the situation in the shattered enclave, the UNRWA Commissioner General notes that some 4,000 children have been reported missing and 17,000 are unaccompanied after nearly 9 months of intense hostilities.
The figures are quite staggering there. They're talking about 4,000 children missing and 17,000 being unaccompanied, so more than 20,000. And you add this to the reported 14,000 children who have been killed since the beginning of the war. Basically, we have every day 10 children who are losing one leg or two legs on average. This gives you an idea of the scope of the type of childhood a child can have in Gaza. 1 in 5 persons are living in a catastrophic nutritional situation. Then the acute malnutrition impacts nearly the entire population in Gaza, more than 90%. And between those being in emergency and catastrophic situation, and catastrophic means risk of famine is here at any time between now and September, we have in total more than 1 million people.
In the meantime, Special Coordinator for the Middle East Peace Process, Tor Wennesland, is expressing his serious concerns about the risk of escalation in the region. Speaking to the Council on Tuesday, Wennesland reiterated the Secretary General's concern that further military escalation will only guarantee more suffering, more devastation to communities in Lebanon and Israel, and more potentially catastrophic consequences for the region. He also emphasized the ongoing hostilities in Gaza are further fueling regional instability.
I reiterate the Secretary General's concerns that further military escalation will only guarantee more suffering, more devastations to communities in Lebanon and Israel, and more potentially catastrophic consequences for the region. In complement to the efforts of UNSCOL and UNIFIL, I'm encouraging all sides to immediately take urgent steps to de-escalate the situation. The ongoing hostilities in Gaza are further fueling regional instability. There must be an immediate and unconditional release of all hostages and an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. There is a deal on the table, and it should be agreed, and fast. Effective mechanisms for humanitarian notification, safe conditions for humanitarian operations, and sufficient access to humanitarian needs remain sorely lacking and must be put in place without delay. Following another series of serious security incidences this last weekend impacting humanitarian actors in Gaza, the UN welcomes the opportunity to clarify with the IDF on how the current situation can be clearly improved. While projection of imminent famine in the northern governorates have been averted through an increase in food deliveries, food insecurity has worsened in the south. Nearly all of Gaza's population continues to face high levels of food insecurity. There are nearly 500,000 people facing catastrophic insecurity.
Let's head back now to the war in Gaza and take you to Birmingham in the UK, where Dr. Esenu Korebe is standing by, general practitioner with NHS England. Dr. Esenu, it's always great to see you again. I was trying to call your attention earlier to the fact that when you see stories, terrifying and horrifying stories coming from Gaza as regards to the war there and the devastating conditions of the healthcare systems and the frontline workers, how does this come to you? How are you receiving such stories?
Thank you very much, Kelly. I must say that the situation currently in Gaza as pertaining to healthcare workers is very, very dicey. In fact, there is a state of acute trauma amongst the healthcare workers in Gaza, with at least 500 healthcare workers killed during this process, and nearly 800 attacks on healthcare facilities across the Gaza Strip. And thinking about this, it brings quite a lot of shock to me, because healthcare workers and health facilities in war should be protected and should be guarded. And to think that people who are meant to look after the injured, look after the wounded, are being targeted in Gaza is rather disheartening. And this has significantly affected the morale of doctors, nurses, and healthcare workers in Gaza. And I remember when I worked during unusual circumstances during the COVID pandemic. It's really heartbreaking when you have situations that or circumstances that brings down the morale of the healthcare workers, because it then affects the extent to which they can be effective in their job and in carrying out their responsibility as healthcare providers. So I think it's a very dire state in Gaza at the moment, because people are being injured on a daily basis. People are being wounded on a daily basis. And the facilities that are meant to look after the injured children, the injured citizens, are also under attack. So nowhere and nobody is safe at the moment in Gaza, and it is quite troubling.
Absolutely troubling. We understand that of its 36 hospitals, 32 have been damaged or raided, and we're also learning that just 16 are still functional, even though not almost 100%. I'm talking about healthcare facilities. Some have there are reports of shortages of medication, equipment, and staff, and all of that. So, do you fear there could be a total collapse of the healthcare systems in Gaza?
Absolutely. I think we are just a few miles away from that, because at the moment, the few hospitals left in Gaza have exceeded capacity. As a matter of fact, they are overflowing. And as you rightly said, Kelly, there's not enough medications, there's not enough staff. Staff are scared for their lives. They are not motivated. They are drained. They've been working back-to-back shifts. People don't have beds in hospital again. People are managed on the floor, in the corridors. So I think if not already collapsed, the health care system or sector in Gaza at the moment is at the brink of collapse. And I think it's at this point where we need to turn our eyes to the international community to call, some sort of halt on the attack on healthcare services and healthcare facilities in Gaza. I think it's very important. Otherwise, we will see a situation where the health sector in Gaza crumbles totally, and I fear that would be devastating, Kelly.
And allow me to take you up on a quote by the International Rescue Committee, because the IRC is concerned about the escalating mental health and psychological toll of civilians, particularly children who are grappling with the devastating impacts of the Israel-Hamas war. What do you say?
I mean, it's going to be very, very impactful, not just on children, but I think on every particular person who is unfortunately experiencing, this war at the moment. It would affect them physically, as we've seen in photos coming from Gaza. It would affect them psychologically as well, and for children as well. Many years to come, some of them might still suffer from post-traumatic stress disorders as a result of what they have seen and what they have experienced during the period of this war. And it will take a while for many citizens there, for children alike, to fully recover from the effects of this war psychologically and even physically. People have lost loved ones, they have lost body parts, people have been rendered disabled as a result of the war. So it's multifactored, and I think it will take quite a long time before people recover physically, psychologically, and even emotionally from what is happening in Gaza at the moment.
I'm not sure, just one final question, maybe in 15 seconds or less, what the WHO ratio is as per one doctor to how many patients? 600?
That's correct. Yes, that's correct. But of course, you can imagine what the situation will be like in Gaza at the moment. It's overwhelming, and I don't want to put a figure to that, but we'll be talking about one doctor to tens of thousands of patients at the moment in Gaza.
Really very devastating and harrowing images we can see from the war in Gaza's healthcare facilities continue to see sustained severity of mass casualty. We can only hope and pray for an immediate ceasefire and perhaps a permanent one. Dr. Essenu Korebe, thank you indeed for analysis. It's always great to see you again.
Thank you very much.